Hey guys, so I just want to go over a few of the revisions that I've made. The shaft seals that I was using originally, you can see they're a bit taller than the stock ones. And what was happening was this part of the rotor, the seal would basically be pressing inside of there, and it's a little bit wider diameter than this part of the shaft, which is, you know, supposed to be the part where it actually rides in. So what was happening is the seal would sit up much higher, and you can kind of see is wider. So because it was sitting up so tall, basically because it has to be flush with this inside case, it can't stick in past that. It would be catching on the seal itself and cause the seal to spin around inside of this bore. So the shaft seal would sort of spin out and walk out, and then it would dump all of its fluid out that way. So that made me change tactics of how I was bleeding this thing. So what I'm doing now, or before I get too far into that, I'm using a much shorter seal that also doesn't have, like, the actual lip of it doesn't engage so high up. It engages further down on the skinnier lobe. But what I'm doing now is I'm installing the seals first, and then I'm using this retaining compound, and then I'll put it in the degassing chamber because that stuff cures in the absence of air. So I'm putting it with no fluid inside of the degassing chamber and putting it under vacuum for 24 hours. Also doing is I've had previous problems with the diaphragms, the factory retaining compound failing after cleaning it and degassing it, and then it popping off and losing its fluid that way. So basically the diaphragm after ultrasonic cleaning and the shaft seal gets new retaining compound, and then it gets put under vacuum for 24 hours. And I'm also punching stakes as a secondary mechanical line of defense to keep the shaft seal from walking out. Secondly, the way that I'm bleeding these is I'm doing it with the two case halves split, and you can see all those fucking bubbles coming out. This is going on like an hour and a half. It usually takes about 4 hours of degassing like this until it stops bubbling. And what I'll do is after it finally stops bubbling, I'll install the two case halves with it submerged, but I won't fully tighten the cases together because I have to put my vacuum pump on the diaphragm to preload the diaphragm and pull about 20 inches of vacuum on it. That's about 90% of its rack travel, and then the remaining 10% is to account for thermal expansion of the fluid heating up, but still giving a good amount of headroom for it to, you know, push and basically maintain a positive pressure on this case. And you really need that positive pressure because fluid is inevitably going to seep out of these seals. Very, very, very extremely slow leak. It'll take years for it to happen, but if you don't have that positive pressure on there, you can get air ingress. And I've been saying it since the beginning, guys. Air is the enemy of these pumps. It needs that hydraulic actuation to basically work the pumps. Basically, that plunger is forcing fluid inside of here, causing it to expand. And this side deals with the fuel. So you have your high pressure pump come in through a check valve. It goes into the cylinder where the bellow, as I call it, is housed. You have an O-ring isolating the fuel side from the hydraulic side. And then when the swash plate basically comes around and pushes down on one of the three plungers, causing it to expand, it squeezes and it's trying to compress the fluid, but it can't. The pressure differential between the high side coming in and the pressure being built up inside the chamber is greater, so it forces the inlet check valve to close, and another more like a pressure relief valve, if you will, to open and then send out to the high outlet side of it. So I hope that makes sense to you guys. But essentially, after setting this preload with it still submerged, then I'll apply my 20 inches of vacuum onto this with it still submerged, and then I'll tighten the screws down with it still submerged, and then it's sealed, it's closed. Then I can release the vacuum preload, and the spring is pushing, you know, that positive pressure inside of the hydraulic cavity of this pump, and then it can work. I'm also using JB Weld as a secondary mechanical line of defense to strengthen these from wanting to pop out. This seems to do a really good job on its own, but after having the factory bond fail, I just wanted to eliminate it because I figured I'm kind of doing two things here on the shaft seal. I'm doing the bond, and then the stakes is a mechanical bond. So I'm doing the retaining compound on the diaphragm, and then the JB Weld as a mechanical bond. That being said, I am starting to beta test this. I'm charging $300, even though this is really labor intensive. It's also not completely proven and foolproof, because I can do everything to the best of my ability, and I can still end up with bellows that I didn't catch that have cracks in them. It might not be completely visible when they're in the more compressed condition. It might even hold under my compressed air test, but under the really high pressure of the hydraulic, it can cause it to completely fail. So that's one of the ways these pumps can fail. It's usually the O-rings that fail. That's what I'm replacing with the FKM O-rings. I'm also doing the shaft seals. The new shaft seals are FKM. I still haven't fucking figured out or even really looked into the case O-ring. That hasn't been a problem for me yet, and I've only kind of just been addressing the problems as, you know, they rear their fucking ugly heads, and the case seal hasn't really been a problem for me, but I do still want to start replacing those in the future. If you send me a pump that's like has hard part damage, like this bellow is cracked, for example, or one guy sent me a pump that had been sitting with ethanol in it for years, and it basically ruined the check valves inside. The check valves are located behind this welded plate. There's not much I can really do in terms of bringing those back. The best thing that I can really do is replace the entire body with the donor body. The diaphragm could technically have failed, but that usually shows up pretty quick when you pump it under vacuum with the hand pump. It'll either hold pressure or it'll slowly bleed down. If it's slowly bleeding down, the diaphragm's bad. I'll have to source that from another used pump. And the solenoids can also be bad, but usually I can just apply 12 volt to them and see if they move or not. I'm also replacing these O-rings with FKM O-rings because these are directly exposed to fuel. Basically everything except for the case is FKM right now. So I hope this gives you a more clear idea of what's really involved to do this. The different, how do I even put it? The different methods and how I've adapted and how I've progressed throughout this whole endeavor.